Welcome back. We're going to jump ahead to chapter 12. This is a little bit weird. Just go with me here. And section 1, we're going to do a quick little review of proportions. And when you have one fraction equaling the second fraction, the easiest way to solve that is cross multiplication. So 2 times y equals 5 times 4, which is 20. So y would equal 10. Another way you could think about this is if you scale this up by multiplying by 2, this would be 4 over 10, and then you could just see that y is equal to 10 because those are both 4. In number 2, we could scale this up by multiplying or we could just cross multiply. So I'm going to grab a calculator. So 9x would equal 14 times 2.7, which is 37.8. So when you divide both of those sides by 9, x would equal 4.2. Alright, 3 times 7 is 21, 8 times x is 8x, and 21 divided by 8, let's leave that as, alright, 21 divided by 8, if we divide that to get an improper number, that would be 2 goes in to give us 16, with 5 left over, so 2 and 5/8, that's probably your best answer. Or the fraction. The decimal is 2.625. The decimal does terminate, so it wouldn't be a huge deal to have it in decimal form. But remember, if decimals don't terminate, you will end up with an error when you're trying to solve bigger numbers. Alright, 6y equals 15. And then 15 divided by 6 would be, that would have to be reduced for full credit. So 3 goes into both of those. So that'd be 5/2. And you could also just do 15 divided by 6, which is 2.5, or 5 divided by 2, which is 2.5, or 2.5. Alright, the next question says, find the value of y varies directly with x. And y equals -6 when x equals 3. Now, direct variation means you have something called y equals mx, and there's no b. So if you want to find the m value, you would do y divided by x. So this is what I'm given. So m would equal y divided by x. So m would equal -6 over 3. So our slope is -2. Now I need to find y when x is -4. So remember, y equals mx. My m is -2. My x is -4. So my y would be 8. Now there is a proportion you can set up for direct variation. So y divided by x would equal y divided by x. So if we put these in, -6 over 3 would equal something over -4. If we cross multiply, we would get 3y equals 24. So again, you would get y equals 8. So the reason this is the proportion is because y over x equals the slope, and this y over x also equals the slope, so they would equal each other. So for the next one, if you want to just use the proportion, you can. Or you can use the thinking of solving for m and finding the missing x or y. So I'm going to go ahead and do 6 over 30. And I know this because it says direct. It's supposed to be a 30. So y over x. And I'm putting a 1 because that x and that y go together. And then this x and this y go together. So y over x would have to equal y over the x that goes with that. So 30y would have to equal 6 times 45. And then when you divide by 30, you would get 9. Alright, so if we were going to talk about the length and width of something with an area of 24, we know that length times width gives us 24. So we're going to think about all of the numbers that make that work. So 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, 4 times 6, 5 is a decimal. We can include it as 4.8, or you could just skip it. 6 would then give you 4. 7 is another weird number. Let's go ahead and just start making the 8 match up. 8 giving you 3, and then 12 giving 2, and 24 giving 1. If you want to put, like, you could add in 10 giving you 2.4 if you want. If you're going to analyze this table, it's going to be a little difficult because right here we're increasing by 1s, and then we increase by 2, and then 4, and then 12. So you can't just look at the y values and analyze them. What you're going to see here is that when you multiply the length times the width, you always get the same number, which is 24. Length times width gives you 24. That could be x times y gives you 24. So we could write this equation as y equals 24 divided by x. This is something called a hyperbola. Let's go ahead and graph it. Over 1 up 24. Over 2 up 12. Over 3 up 8. Over 4 up 6. 6 gives us 4. 8 gives us 3. 12 gives us 2. 24 gives us 1. So can I have the length or width of a decimal? The answer is yes. I'm going to go ahead and connect these dots. And I'm never going to get 0. I'm never going to touch the x-axis or the y-axis. I'm going to get closer and closer and closer, but it will never be 0. If you remember that word, these are called asymptotes. So it never touches the x-axis, and it also never touches the y-axis. So that's your hyperbolic curve. So what we initially had was a direct variation. That was what we were doing in the opening problem. So direct variation is y equals, I'm going to put mx. That's the exact same thing as y equals kx. K and m mean the same thing. So I could write that the k, the constant of variation, is y over x. This is for direct variation. What we just did is indirect variation. Direct variation, it's usually doing the same thing, like increasing. This, as you can see in our last graph, is not increasing, it was decreasing. As x got bigger, y got smaller. So that's inverse. And x times y equals the constant of variation. Different than this. That's direct. This is indirect. So if you have 2 points and you're trying to do indirect variation and see what the missing point is, you could multiply the x times the y to get the k, and then set that equal to the x times the y of the other ordered pair. So, are these inverse variation? So the question is, does x times y give you a constant? Well, negative 12 times 24 is definitely not equal to 1 times negative 2, because that's negative 2. Something way bigger. It would be negative 288. And 8 times 16, negative, would be negative 128. So this is no. This is not an inverse variation. The next one is looking pretty good. 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 1 is 9. 18 times 0.5 is 9. So this is yes. In fact, x times y equals 9. You could write your equation as y equals 9 divided by x. And then this last one's no. This is linear. So it's not going to be written as an x times y equation. So if we're going to make a table where y is 0.5 and x is negative 12, that would mean that x times y would give us negative 6. So I'm going to go ahead and put negative 12 giving 0.5. So you can think of any numbers that multiply to give negative 6. If x is negative 6, y would be 1. If x is negative 3, y would be 2. If x is negative 2, y would be 1. If x is negative 1, y would be 6. Now, we could also do 1 giving us negative 6. 2, I think I put a 1 here. I meant to say 3, giving us negative 3. 3 giving us negative 2. 6 giving us negative 1. And 12 giving us negative 1/2. If we were to plot these, we're going to plot these. Let me rephrase that. We're going to get a true hyperbola. This equation is this, that we're going to be graphing. I'm going to say that's negative 12. We'll go up by 1s on the x, or the y. So negative 12 is positive 1/2. Negative 6 is positive 1. Negative 3 is positive 2. Negative 2 is positive 3. And negative 1 is positive 6. So this over here is going to go like this, never touching the x or the y axis. And now I'm going to graph this part. This is the same exact graph. Inverses have something in 2 quadrants. So 1 will give us negative 6. And 2 will give us negative 3. And 3 will give us negative 2. 6 will give us negative 1. And 12 will give us negative 1/2. So that's a graph of a negative inverse. A positive inverse, or a positive hyperbola, is in these 2 quadrants. Again, never touching the x or the y axis unless there's a shift. This is direct right here because there's nothing added or subtracted. So that's why it is perfectly not touching the axes. You could like pick this whole thing up and shift it. So we've got our inverse variation, which is rate times time, because distance equals rate times time. So this is our distance, rate, and time. So we're going to use a graph to estimate how long it'll take to travel 350 miles, driving 55 miles per hour. Now, if you wanted to solve this for y, to write your equation, it's y equals 350 over x. If you have a graphing calculator, you can go to y equals, and you can type 350 divided by x, and hit table, and generate a bunch of points. So 0 is error. 0 does not exist because that's the asymptote. That's where it will never cross. So 1 would be a good place to start, being 350. Again, this is x and y. 2 is 175. 5 is 70. And we need to get to 55, so 7's 50. I'm just going to put some of the whole numbers here. 10 gives 35. 14 is 25. And these are numbers that multiply to give 350. 25 is 14. 35 is 10. 50 is 7. 55 in the calculator says 6.3636. I could find the exact by doing 350 divided by 55. And that's the question that I'm asked about how long will it take to travel 350 at 55 miles per hour. So that's my miles per hour. And this is my hours, my time. So my answer is 6.36 hours. So if we were going to graph this, it really wouldn't make sense to have a negative time, so I'm not going to worry about this quadrant info. It wouldn't make sense in the real world. But if we go by 5, this would be 55 out here. And then on the x-axis, we need to get up to 350. So how about we go by 50s? So 1 gives 350. 2 is 175. 5 is 70. 7 is 50. 10 is 35. 14, 25. 25 is 14. So see how it's getting closer and closer to the axes? 35 is 10. 57. Like, it really doesn't even matter because you're just going to graph as close to the axis as possible, never touching it, never crossing it. Again, there's an asymptote here. This thing is never touched and it's never crossed. It's always above it. So, that is what an inverse entails. If you want to write an inverse, x1, y1 would equal x2, y2. So negative 4 times 2 would have to equal negative 6 times y. I'm getting these numbers from this story. So negative 8 would equal negative 6y. So the answer here would be 8 6. Two negatives cancel each other. 4 thirds. 1 1/3. And I'm going to skip this. I'll try to not even copy it for you because you guys are walking in here. All right. Have a lovely evening.